Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, it's good. We get to do a little breaking news, everyone's favorite kind of show. And, sometimes the breaking news is bad. This is good breaking news for Ohio State. So this is always, I think probably everyone's favorite kind of show.
Yes, Ohio State's long national nightmare is now over. They have a quarterback committed in the class of 2026. Luke Fahey out of Mission Viejo High School in Mission Viejo, California, has committed to the Buckeyes. Ohio State had been looking for a 2026 quarterback for over about 2 years now, and they finally get one. Not right at the buzzer, but getting close. Commits to Ohio State over offers. I guess one of his main attractors was Indiana, but also had an offer from Oregon earlier in the process, and Arkansas, Auburn, Florida State, schools like that. That is who Ohio State was competing against. 24/7 composite, the number 355 player overall, the number 23 quarterback overall, the number 33 quarterback overall in the nation. And in terms of, I don't even know if you call this a fallback plan, Tom, because this is about the same time that they ended up with C.J. Stroud in 2019, whenever he committed to Ohio State in July at a 7 or the Elite 11 or whatever it was. So just because it doesn't happen right away doesn't mean it's not not meant to be. But there you go, Luke Fahey, Tom, a quarterback finally in Ohio State's 2026 recruiting class.
Yeah, the quarterback recruiting, this is one of these years where sometimes there's just a very straightforward year, and 2025 was a very straightforward year for Ohio State quarterback recruiting where, it was Ryan Montgomery and it was Tavian St. Clair, and you had a couple really good in-state prospects, and it was just kind of a matter of who were they going to go with, who were they going to give the green light to, and it was Tavian St. Clair, and he ended up developing into a great prospect and a top 5-10 player in the country by most recruiting rankings. And it was really easy and drama free, and they had him in the class for quite a while, and that was that's one kind of quarterback recruiting class, a recruiting cycle for Ohio State. And they currently have 2027 is already largely taken care of. They may add someone else, we'll see, but you a lot of times have that taken care of very early. And I think everyone feels like, well, that's the norm. This is how it always goes. It's not always how it goes, because as you mentioned, C.J. Stroud, and that was in 2019, he committed for the class of 2020. That was, a very late addition, and that was a second addition to that class because they already had Jack Miller committed for that class. But you got to remember, they had Devin Brown was a very, very late addition the year that he committed. They had, because that was a result of when you were reclassifying. Lincoln Keenholz was a very, very late addition in his class. He committed, I think, in the fall. So, this is not particularly late. It's a little later than normal, but it's not particularly late. But I think that's maybe partly related to what has come before Luke Fahey, where the year before you've got a 5-star top 5 type player in Tavian St. Clair. The year before that, you've got Julian Sayin, who was a 5-star quarterback in his class. So I think part of this process is, if you're a 5-star quarterback, you're generally going to be coming in expecting to start year 1, year 2. I think Luke Fahey has to be coming in understanding, look, there's a lot of talent in front of you. It might be a few years before you start. And so you're coming in with sort of a little bit of a different expectation than, and that takes kind of a different type of player to be willing to do that, because there's so much, I want to start day one. Mm-hmm. I want to have the huge NIL deal day one. You have to have a little bit of a different outlook to be able to look at Billy Fessler, Ryan Day, and kind of go, look, these guys are developing quarterbacks and turning them into big NFL earners and, Heisman Trophy finalist kind of players. You're going to have to be probably a little bit patient when you get to Columbus.
And we saw a lot of these 2026 quarterbacks the past 3 years at June camps. And we've talked before, one of the problems, in my opinion, with the 2026 class is that a lot of these guys were camping at the same time that Tavian St. Clair was stopping by to camp as well. So, Dia Bell, who is the number 3 quarterback in the class, who is signed with, or will sign with Texas, has committed to Texas. he was at the same camp as Tavian St. Clair last year, and he was like second in line behind Tavian St. Clair. So he got an up close, firsthand look at what he would be competing against. And like 5 days later, he committed to Texas. I can't remember if Brady Smigel, we saw him at camp or not, but saw Jaden O'Neal camp, and then shortly after that commit to Oklahoma, who has since decommitted from Oklahoma, I think this past week, and committed to Florida State. But you got these guys that are camping the same time as Tavian St. Clair, and I don't think it helped matters with Ohio State's recruiting of the 2026 quarterback. But now, all things happen in their own time. Luke Fahey is listed at like 6', 190. I think it's you'll see how well Ohio State handles the 6-foot quarterback this year with Julian Sayin, most likely, and I think you'll get an idea because they're very similar in terms of like mobility and size and things like that. And Luke Fahey can run a little bit and can escape just like Julian Sayin can. So there'll be some proof of concept, assuming that Julian Sayin wins the job and does well. So you'll get to see what an offense will look like with a 6-foot quarterback, because Ohio State really hasn't done that since JT Barrett in 2017, and he'll tell you he's 6'2", just so you know. He's going to very much tell you that he's 6'2". So, but it's not all that uncommon anymore, and so there you go. I think there was consideration for if you don't get a 2026, maybe do you go get two 2027s, and are you trying to talk Brady Edmonds into reclassifying to 2026? So maybe this answers some of those questions. Tom, as we know, you try to get a quarterback every year.
Yeah, you do try and get a quarterback every year. And I don't know that this closes the door on them potentially taking two 2027 quarterbacks. It certainly, I guess, if anything, makes it slightly less likely, because, if you didn't get a 2026, you would certainly want to take two 2027s. But I think you're at the point with quarterback recruiting where you're not going to keep every single guy you get, and you're not going to bring in a guy in the transfer portal. If you have a Tavian St. Clair and a Julian Sayin and a Lincoln Keenholz on your roster, and you're bringing in a guy in the transfer portal this year, you're not, and they literally did, and that in Eli Brickholder, you're not bringing in a guy who's coming in and expecting to start. You're bringing in a guy who's going to be, provide you some depth, provide you some reps in practice, and, provide you a little bit of an insurance policy, rather than going in and trying to bring in the guy who was the elite starter at a group of 5 level school, and you're trying to, bring him up, or even like a Will Howard type where you're bringing someone in to start. That's not really what you're going to be doing right now. And I think right now you're just trying to make sure you have a full room. And Luke Fahey is far more than just a, roster filler. This is, I don't want to make this sound like this is a, this is just sort of an insurance policy. Like he's someone who's going to be probably not an immediate impact guy, but someone who absolutely could be a starter for Ohio State a year or two down the road. It's going to be a year or two down the road, not an immediate 2026 starting quarterback kind of thing. But, I don't think that this impacts the likelihood too much that they're going to potentially go after a second quarterback in 2027, because you are going to, just history indicates, you are going to lose some of these people to the transfer portal. You don't keep, if you recruit one quarterback a year for 5 years, at the end of the 4th year, you don't have all of these guys still on the team. Someone's going to leave because you're recruiting players who are just too good to just be sitting on the bench forever. There are plenty of programs that are, would absolutely love to have these guys. And I don't think you mentioned Ole Miss when you were talking about the schools that were recruiting Luke Fahey. Lane Kiffin knows a thing or two about quarterback play, and Lane Kiffin was very interested in bringing in Luke Fahey. So this is someone who's going to have, had plenty of suitors coming out of high school, and in a year or two, if he's not starting at Ohio State, just like all the other Ohio State quarterbacks, is going to have plenty of suitors. You don't see Ohio State quarterbacks transferring and going to play for, Merrimack or Monmouth or something like that. Guys who leave Ohio State, just recent years, guys who've left Ohio State, LSU, Texas, Florida,
Syracuse.
Syracuse. Yeah. But you've Cal, these are guys going to at least Power 5 programs. And in many cases were guys who did not start at Ohio State. So, you're still, if you're not starting at Ohio State, you are still good enough potentially to start at plenty of schools that are, near the top of the list. So I think this is, I think, number one, a little bit of a testament to Luke Fahey taking a little bit of a long-term view on this, which is, probably a little more rare among 17 and 18-year-olds than it probably should be. But, good for him for taking that view. And it's also a testament to the developmental chops that Ryan Day and Billy Fessler have, and the fact that you can look very, very clearly at Ohio State and go, look, if I go to Ohio State, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to be the starter at Ohio State, and then I'm going to be, potentially a Heisman contender and a national championship contender. And then I'm going to get drafted in the NFL, and I'm probably going to have a halfway decent career in the NFL. Or if it doesn't work out at Ohio State, I'm not going to be, scrounging for a landing spot. Ohio State, Ryan Day trained quarterbacks, they tend to land on their feet if they go somewhere else and, land somewhere. Ole Miss will probably still be there. Indiana will probably still be there if things don't work out at Ohio State. But if they do work out at Ohio State, well, the ceiling there is a lot higher than it is at Ole Miss or Indiana.
Yeah, and honestly, the likelihood that a quarterback anymore is going to start for the school that they sign with, I think goes down every single year. But as you said, Ryan Day is either going to prepare the quarterback for the NFL or is going to prepare them to be better at their next place. And so that's kind of what this is. And in terms of the 2027 or whatever, let's not forget, Ohio State lost 3 quarterbacks from last year's team: Aaron Nolan, Will Howard, Devin Brown. And so you're going to have to, and granted, they had 5 last year, which was one more than they would normally have. You've got to make up for that down the road. So the need for 2 in 2027 is still there if they want. But certainly getting the guy in 2026 makes them feel a whole lot better about everything. And as you said, Tom, it's a guy who comes in knowing the situation, knowing what's in front of him, accepting of that, and kind of reminds me a little bit of Lincoln Kienholz, where he would say, if I don't start this year, everything I learned this year is going to help me with next year. And whatever next year is, you're being prepared for something, and you're being improved, you're being, developed. So even if it doesn't end up being here, you'll be better when you get to your next place. So there you go, Ohio State, Luke Fahey, quarterback 2026. Now Ohio State can focus on quarterbacks in 2028 and 2029. How's that sound for you? That's outrageous. So thank you all for tuning in. Hit the thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. We would appreciate that. And of course, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.